All right, hello and welcome everybody. Um, it's great to see so many have joined today for this webinar on live on ServiceNow. We have a special speaker today from Tenable, Nick Kooning, Senior Director of Solutions Architecture. Nick has been working with ServiceNow solutions for longer than I've been at ServiceNow. 6, 7 years, I think, Nick. So
Yep.
super experienced in the areas of asset management, security, also deep knowledge of Tenable. So he's an ideal speaker today to really get into exactly what the new Tenable for OT solutions are and how they work. And we're really looking forward to, to getting this content and sharing it broadly once this webinar is over as well. So Nick, anything you'd like to add about yourself before you get started?
No, thanks for that. That was an amazing introduction. I always forget how long I've been playing in ServiceNow land at this point. Not only do I have the Tenable experience, but I was able to get a lot of knowledge and really grow a new skill set, getting introduced to ServiceNow and working with you guys. So excited to be here, and thanks for the intro. Um, So today we'll do a quick overview of Tenable for anyone that isn't familiar. We won't spend too much time on that, but I always like to make sure everyone understands kind of Tenable and our solution stack. We'll talk about the value of the integrations, a little overview of the integrations, what's changed in the most recent release, and then we'll go into a live demo, show everyone kind of what that looks like, and then we'll go to a Q&A session. So please use the Q&A option within Zoom if you have questions, and towards the end, we'll start answering those. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. There we go. So Tenable, if you're not familiar with us, you may be familiar with Nessus, which has been around, I want to say like 24, 25 years now as a vulnerability assessment tool. But Tenable is much bigger than that. And what we like to think of ourselves as now is the exposure management company. And with exposure management, our goal, unlike Nessus, where we were doing this traditionally for servers, some desktops, the goal with exposure management is to take vulnerability assessment management and misconfiguration and do that across all of the new different types of devices in your environment. So it's not just your traditional on-prem infrastructure anymore, or your remote desktops that you're managing. Today, Tenable has the ability to assist you with the traditional things, but also things like external attack surface. We can help you find those assets and the vulnerabilities on them that you may or may not know about that are internet facing. We help you with those same types of assets and internal assets for web application scanning to find vulnerabilities in those websites that you may be hosting, creating software you may be deploying, and so forth. We have a huge cloud security solution that does everything from infrastructure as code scanning to misconfiguration detection. We have something called agentless assessment that allows us to do the misconfiguration and vulnerability assessment without actually needing to deploy scanners or send packets across the wire. Because it's in the cloud, there's actually APIs. We can collect the information we need and then report those to you. This also has the ability to allow you to compare and contrast what your IAC is deployed and then what's actually sitting out in your real cloud environment, so you can find drift between the two. So lots of functionality around your cloud infrastructure. We have our operational technology solution that helps you to detect vulnerabilities across all of that operational technology and your IoT technology within your environment. And then we have an identity solution that's going to help you find misconfigurations and potential vulnerabilities, and even some detect attacks within Active Directory and your identity solutions. And then with that, in our exposure management platform that we've just released, Tenable.1, you can roll all of this information up into a single view that allows you to understand your risk across all of these different asset types in a single view, and then figure out which things you should be working on first. So basically prioritize that, report on that, as well as understand all of those different assets within a single view. So very high level, obviously, on what we do and the different solutions we have there. And I think it's important to make sure everyone understands kind of where we're at and where this partnership really is so strong. A little bit more background. One of the things that we're very proud of at Tenable is our research teams. We have a very large research team. I always like to think of this back in the AV days. We run a research team that is as big as an old school antivirus company. But that research team is very focused on vulnerabilities. So we do our own zero-day detection. We're out looking for vulnerabilities, reporting those vulnerabilities to the companies whose software we find them in. We do our own research for writing our own plugins, right? And our plugins are really our signatures to be able to detect those. We have a special team that does 24-hour response for net new vulnerabilities that come out so that we can report those to our customers as quickly as possible, and they can actually figure out if those are in their environment. So something like Log4j comes out, we have the ability very, very quickly to start getting signatures out. Now, that doesn't mean we won't continue to write more and more signatures, but our goal is any newsworthy or some type of large event in the vulnerability space, we want to be able to get detections out as soon as possible. And that team is responsible not just for our traditional products, but for all products. So we have this massive research team. And I really think that's what one of our biggest differentiators is our investment in that. And it's really allowed us through, a bunch of different third parties to become number one in the traditional vulnerability management space. And that's also what's helping drive us into the exposure management space across all those products. And then with that unified platform to view and manage the risk across all of those different things. So a little background on Tenable. Now I want to jump into the actual integration and what we're providing with our partnership with ServiceNow. So there's a bunch of different steps in vulnerability management and asset management. And we've kind of broken those out here, and you're going to see these same kind of boxes in different views. We'll start with this one kind of as an overview, and then we'll go into how the integration actually works with the same type of view. So step one is to discover the assets that you have. Where are they? This could be scanners. This could be something like our operational technology that's sitting on the wire, interrogating those devices in that network. This could be something like our external asset management. But first, we need to find the assets. Once we find all of those different types of assets, we need to assess them. And this, if we look across the portfolio, this is where all of those unique different products and solutions that we have come into play. You can't use the same type of scanner you would use on a traditional Windows box in an operational technology environment. You would take down a power plant if you did that. So we have unique technologies that allow us to first discover, and then assess the vulnerabilities for each one of these particular unique environments, whether it's the cloud, OT, IoT, or the traditional IT stuff. Once we've discovered and then assessed the vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, the next step is to prioritize all of this information, because there's just too much, right? You cannot fix every single thing in your environment that you want to. You have to prioritize what you're going to fix, how you're going to fix that, and which ones need to come first. And so Tenable, we have something that we like to call vulnerability priority rating, or VPR, which is a scoring system that we've come up with that we run internally that generates a score, much like a CVSS score, from 0 to 10, that helps better prioritize which vulnerabilities are the most important to be focused on. And every day we recalculate those scores based on the new information we have. And those scores are generated based on our own vulnerability research, by dark web information. The last number I recall is about 150 different data sources go into that algorithm that allows us to generate these scores and help better prioritize vulnerabilities. Because if you played in the space at all, what you end up seeing is that almost every vulnerability that comes out is either higher critical. Well, if everything's higher critical, nothing's a higher critical. And so VPR helps our customers to find the things that are most important, that are most likely to be exploited, and prioritize those. Once you've prioritized, you then need to go remediate. And this is where ServiceNow comes in. And they can also, and ServiceNow can come in with the prioritization as well. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. But with remediation, the next step is get the get this vulnerability to the team or the person who owns actually going and patching that machine or fixing the misconfiguration. So we want to get that to the right person, the right team. We want to make sure that they're doing, if it's a vulnerability that's on 100 machines, let's fix all 100 machines. Let's not just fix one at a time. So now once we've remediated it, then we want to measure. And measuring is really two parts. One is how quickly were we able to do that? Were we able to do it in the SLAs that we wanted to and so forth? But the other part of measuring is making sure that we're actually reducing our risk, and more importantly, that the patch or the fix that we put in place actually reduces the risk or fixes the risk, if you will. And so we want to make sure that we rescan that machine and the vulnerability is actually gone, right? Maybe we didn't reboot the box and the vulnerability is still on the box, so we need to reboot it. So measuring is a secondary step just to make sure that the fix that was put in place, what we think actually did what it was supposed to, and we can report on that, make sure it's done. So if we take this discover, assess, prioritize, remediate, and measure, and we look at it from an integration perspective, this gives you a little bit better view on who's doing which part of this and how everything works together. So if we start on the left-hand side, the discover and assess side, Tenable is going to find those assets, and then we're going to assess those assets for you. Once we've done that, we're going to synchronize that over into ServiceNow. Now, as you recall, I mentioned we have our own prioritization that you can do, and that's going to happen in the Tenable platform. But all of that information that Tenable has is synchronized over when it goes into ServiceNow. And what that allows you to do is do a secondary prioritization right within ServiceNow. So you can leverage all of the information in your CMDB. It could be from any source. Any custom rules, any custom scoring you wanted to build in ServiceNow, you can build out and use that to better prioritize. So you can start with ours as a better starting point and then tune that within ServiceNow using the other information that you have in there. Once you've prioritized it, you're going to coordinate that, right? This is trying to get that information to the right person or the right team to be able to go and fix that. Once it's at the right team, they're going to go ahead and remediate that, right? They'll go through their workflow, do their testing, then deploy it. Once they've remediated it, then they're going to validate that happens within our vulnerability response integrations, both ours and ServiceNow's. There's an ability to do what we call a remediation scan, which is a very targeted, very quick, lightweight scan that allows us to go check for the vulnerability or vulnerabilities that we said were fixed against that machine and confirm that they were actually fixed very quickly. And then once that's complete, we start the process all over again, right? We're going to discover, reassess, and go right back through this. So hopefully that gives you a good high-level overview of how this process flow works from a vulnerability perspective between both Tenable and ServiceNow. I'd like to talk real quick about the different integrations we do have. All of our integrations that are Tenable built support Tenable.io, Tenable.cs, and Tenable.ot. I know a lot of our focus today will be talking about some of the OT stuff that we've done, because that was a lot of what's in this most recent update. But I always like to make sure everyone understands the different things that we have. So if we start from the left, the first app that we have is what we call Tenable for Assets. And this is the biggest integration and set of changes that happened recently. This is an app that's been around, well, the entire time I've been at Tenable, so 5 or 6 years now. And what this app does is it can be a standalone app that does the synchronization out of the Tenable solutions into ServiceNow. And for about 2 years now, we've been using IRE to actually import that information so that you're using that standardized engine that almost every other integration is using to bring in assets. You're using the rules that are built into that and all the functionality that it comes with. What this app is really doing is converting the Tenable data into the ServiceNow CMDB or CI format so that it can be brought in to ServiceNow and then either appended or add net new assets into your CMDB. And with this release, and you'll see on the next slide, we've had IRE, as I mentioned, for a couple of years, but we weren't Service Graph certified. And as of the release a couple of weeks ago, we're now Service Graph certified. which in the OT space and some other spots is actually very important. So we're very excited to have that release come out. The next app in the middle is what we call Tenable for ITSM. And we like to think of this as a very simple starting point for someone who's on a journey to try and get their vulnerability management into ServiceNow to start creating better processes and workflows. This is not as feature rich as something like VR, which is the next app we'll talk about, but it's a good stepping stone to help you get off of spreadsheets and emails into a much more repeatable, reproducible process within ServiceNow. But it doesn't do a lot of the things that VR does. And so that's the last integration on the right is the Tenable for VR or the vulnerability response for Tenable app. There's two different apps for VR. One is built by ServiceNow. Their app supports Tenable.io and Tenable.cs, and our app supports Tenable.ot, which I will show you today. And this app has all the functionality, hopefully, that you're familiar with VR, right? Grouping, rules, scoring, prioritization, all kinds of functionality in it that our ITSM app doesn't. But it's really the next stepping stone. When you really get serious about this, this is the best solution if you really want a full-fledged workflow to be able to do reproducible vulnerability management and remediation. And so VR is a very important integration to us, and we believe it is really the only right way to be actually doing this at scale reproducibly. So with that, one more quick set of updates on what we did. In our latest release, as I mentioned, we added service graph certification. While the apps had a lot of the functionality, we've been doing it. There wasn't a massive change in our apps by any means in this release. It was really more of a certification process. We did release that in this last set of apps, and that's specifically in our assets app. We added some improvements. If you've been using our Tenable.ot app, we improved the way that we were doing asset mapping, and that really actually has two parts to it. One is we added some new classes that our product, Tenable.ot, tracks as mapped into ServiceNow using their classes. And the other thing that we did was we ensured that any asset that comes from our Tenable.ot solution through this integration is brought in and properly linked as an OT asset. So previous to this version of the app, there was a possibility that if you had, like, say you had a Windows desktop that was running in your OT environment and we saw it, we wouldn't always completely link an asset to an OT asset entity if it was something like a Windows server. And so with this release, we've updated that to basically say any asset that comes from Tenable.ot is always going to get that asset mapping so that it will show up as an OT asset, even if it is not, a traditional OT asset. Say it's a Windows desktop, but it's in that environment. We want to make sure that all of those show up the right way. And the last part is we removed support for Tenable.io and Tenable SC from the Tenable for VR app. So if you're currently using Tenable for VR, I think our end of support is April 14th. So you still have a month or so, a couple weeks, before our apps are kind of taken down and we don't support them anymore. There's a huge set of migrations that ServiceNow has built to help folks move from our app for SC and IO over into the ServiceNow built app. We've been doing those migrations with customers. It's about 80% of customers have actually moved to the ServiceNow app already. And we wanted to make sure that for 2 years, we've kind of had two different apps here, and we wanted to make sure that we made it easier for customers to understand, which app should they be using, how do we do this the right way and the best way. And we wanted to make sure that it was the same experience. So we were finally removing IO and SC support, and that came out in our latest set of apps as well. So we actually renamed our Tenable for VR app to be Tenable.ot for VR. So if you're using that app and you go to upgrade, before you upgrade, make sure that you've got a plan in place, assuming you're using IO or SC, to get migrated over to the ServiceNow built app, which has the same functionalities that our app had. It's just built by ServiceNow, right? It's just a little bit of a move on who did it. So with that, I'm going to actually jump over into the live demo, show you a little bit of the apps, and then we'll get to a Q&A, and we'll go from there. So give me a second here. Log in. All right. So one of the first things to kind of show here, and apologies, I may fumble around a little bit. This new UI, I'm still not quite so good at. I think I spent too much time on the old one. So first thing I like to show, especially because we're Service Graph, is you can see that Tenable now shows up in the connectors for Service Graph. Oh, clicked on the wrong button. And this is really just showing partially that you can configure it both from the Service Graph specific section or from our section. Everything points to the same thing, or you can use the traditional way. If you're familiar with our apps previously, you can still go to our menu set and actually create connectors. So in Tenable, we have this concept of connectors, and you create a connector to a product. And then once you have that connector, you create scheduled jobs to do different things based on the apps that you have installed. So you can see I've got SC, OT, IO, and another IO connector actually in this box. I'm going to pick OT since we'll spend some time on that today. Go into the OT connector. There we go. And you can see I've actually got a bunch of different jobs here. I've got one for VR. I've got a job for assets. I've got the plugin import for VR. I've got the vulnerabilities import for VR and assets import. And these are the jobs. You would go ahead and click new. It'll ask you some questions. And this is actually how you do the configuration, which I probably won't walk through. It's not the most interesting thing to see, but it's just the standard way that these apps are designed and work on our side. So you could have, if you have 100 OT boxes and you wanted a connection directly to each one instead of some centralized connection, you can actually do that. The other thing with our apps is they're fully domain separation aware. At level 2, which I think they renamed that, but it's basically the data level. So there's data separation if you are doing domain separation in your environment. Our apps do support that. So on the OT side, let's go and look at the data that actually comes in with this. So the scheduled jobs, you set those up for the apps that you have installed and the data you want to pull in. And then you're kind of off to the races. So we'll start with the CMDB, ci.list. So we can go into the CMDB, and for sake of this, we'll go ahead and just group by these so you can kind of see what's coming in here. So different discovery sources, even though it's all one set of apps, you will see those different sources if you're bringing in assets from IO, SC, OT, and you can drill into those. And the big thing with OT, right, that's really different than the IO or SC side, everything's using IRE, everything is going through whatever rules you put in place there. The real difference is the class mapping that happens for OT. So we're using a different type of class. And of course, the first page that's showing up here is just the network adapters in OT. But these are going to be things like HMIs that are specific to OT. So we're mapping our classes to the OT classes that ServiceNow has. We actually worked with ServiceNow when they were building this out to expand that class model to make sure that we could cover all the different things that our product was actually able to find. So once we find those OT assets, the only other big difference between an OT asset and a traditional server or something in the cloud is that there's OT entities related to that. So there's a little bit different mapping that happens. When that data comes in, it is obviously still going through IRE, but we're mapping it to OT entities so that you can track things like Purdue models and things like that. And then all of this works right within the pre-built views that ServiceNow has for OT assets. So once you have all your assets coming in, right, whether it's from IO or SC, you would then bring in vulnerabilities. And you could do that two ways. Obviously, that ITSM app, I'm not going to show that today. It's very simple, and we'd be more than happy to give you a demo of that if you're interested in it. But what I do want to talk about is if you have OT or you have the ServiceNow built integration, once you're bringing in these assets, you can now bring in the vulnerabilities associated to that. So we'll go to vulnerable items. Sorry, we're Give me a second here as I remember this new UI.
When you get a break in the action, not right away, there are two questions here that are more technical that that you can answer live probably, or defer live.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, how about I'll finish up this this high level on the VR side, and then we'll take a look at the technical questions.
Perfect.
Cool. So these are vulnerable items in ServiceNow, and I should have a discovery source on here. So we could go ahead and group these by source. And in this box, we should only see OT because that's I only have the Tenable built integration installed, and the only vulnerabilities that you can pull into vulnerability response are from the Tenable OT product now. So you would have to have the ServiceNow integration if you want the other two. But these vulnerabilities, we brought in the assets. Now we're bringing in the vulnerabilities associated to those specific assets. And these work exactly the same as a traditional vulnerability. You're going to have all the information that comes from Tenable filled out in the correct fields within ServiceNow. The other thing that you have with our integration is in the background, we actually custom map any field that Tenable has where there's not a direct correlation or a field that makes sense for us to put the data in. We actually add a custom Tenable asset attributes to all of these records where you can get any Tenable information added directly to this field. You could add it to your lists and your views, but it allows you to have any information that's within Tenable right within the ServiceNow user interface just by going and selecting the field and adding it wherever you would like it. So it's a pretty unique thing that we do with our integration. ServiceNow does that as well with theirs for the IO and SC side, but it gives you the ability, once you have an integration like this set up with VR, to never really have to leave VR. All the information you need or could want is right within VR. And now because it's in there, not only does the security team have that information within there and can use it for prioritization and SLAs and all of that, but the IT team also has access to that. So now both the IT and the security team have the same exact information in the same exact place and can look at it the same exact way instead of a spreadsheet that they're sending around or something like that. So this is the integration with VR. We're going to bring all the vulnerabilities from Tenable OT directly into VR. We're going to map all the fields that can be mapped, and then any field that we couldn't find a good place for, there's a custom set of fields that you can just easily add directly. ServiceNow almost covers every field at this point, but there's still some unique fields that we have that there's not a direct place for, so we make sure that those are available to you. So with that, let me jump over and read these questions real quick that Tom mentioned and see if there's anything we should answer before I just jump back over to the slide deck. So that first question, let's take that one offline. So Thomas, I'll send you my email address and you can ping me and I'll help you get in contact with someone.
It would be useful to know which integration app you're using, the one developed by Tenable or the one developed by...
version 5 is ours. It's our app. I can, yeah, sorry.
Thanks.
Tenable SC, and notice it's on. So this question, I think it's generic enough to kind of talk about here. The question is basically asking or saying they have a mismatch when they're bringing in what Tenable calls assets or ServiceNow calls CIs. When they're bringing them in from a Tenable product into ServiceNow, they're seeing a mismatch. Either the asset's not directly matching an existing one, I would guess. That's probably the biggest problem. Or maybe it doesn't match and then it goes and creates another one, right? So bringing in assets and really synchronizing assets into ServiceNow is not for the faint of heart. I think it's probably the nicest way to say it. It takes some work, right? You're trying to get two completely different systems to talk the same way about a single asset. And it's not always the easiest thing in the world to do, whether it's our solution or ServiceNow's or some competitor of ours or someone else you want to bring assets in for. Doing asset matching is, I've been doing integrations for 15 years now. Asset matching is the hardest part because everyone has a different level of information about the asset. And sometimes people only have an IP address, and sometimes everyone agrees on the IP, but come to find out they're in different networks. Or in a perfect world, everyone has like the same serial number for the asset, so it's a very easy thing to do. But unfortunately, that's just not how different solutions work. Not everyone has a serial number. Sometimes they may have it, but it's not available through APIs. And so with asset matching, I should step back. There's one other part to this question, and the real question is, are the CI rules matching responsible for tenable vulnerability CIs or determined through the transform field map? So in the Tenable built app, and even in the ServiceNow built app, though it's a tiny bit different in the ServiceNow one. What we recommend in the Tenable app is if you're using our VR app, you start with assets, and you do, like, say you're starting day one. You literally just turn the integration on and you go figure out what the mapping was, right? So you had a very good CMDB that was already filled out, and now you want to bring in Tenable assets and match them. The first step is just turn it on and see what happens. And that's kind of like import number one. And that gives you your baseline of how well is the matching working. From there, you would go tweak and tune the IRE matching rules to better import that data. So then you would clear out the data, and we have this documented on our site, how to do that. You'd clear out all the existing matches, and then you would go in and you would do import number 2 once you tweak those rules. And then, maybe that gets you to 80% matching, and then you tweak it again. So you do that 4, 5, 6, 10 times maybe. But once you do that, you should be able to get somewhere in the realm of like a 90 percentile of matching. In a big organization, getting much past 80 to 90% is almost impossible, just with the difference in data, the difference in everything. It gets pretty hard to get much better matching than that. But once you have your matching good is when you would actually start doing the vulnerability response side. You want to make sure that matching is correct before you turn on the vulnerability side. In ServiceNow's app, obviously that's a little bit different because it's just a vulnerability app. In the background, it's using IRE. It is doing the asset matching. The process is a little bit different, but basically the same, because you're going through IRE, using IRE rules to match the asset information to an existing asset or create an asset, and then that's what actually ends up linking the vulnerabilities together. So there's a process on the ServiceNow side to do that as well. But the rules in IRE are what control how that asset is matched across the board, whether it's the Tenable built assets app or it's the Tenable VR app. Our VR app actually uses our assets app to do any asset matching that it's doing. And then when it's using the assets app is using IRE. ServiceNow works the same way. The only difference really with them is it's a single app that's doing both steps. It's doing the vulnerabilities and the assets, but before it can do the vulnerability, it has to do the asset part. So they do the asset part through IRE using those rules. And then once they know what the asset is, either created or matched to it, then they go ahead and create the vulnerabilities and link to that. So IRE rules are always going to be how you resolve mismatches in the CMDB. Even if those are vulnerability mismatches, that is happening because of the way that the CMDB rules work within IRE. Sorry, that's a very long explanation, but it's actually a very, very important part of the integration when you're doing VR. Asset matching is really the most important thing to do right. Once you've done that, turning on VR is very simple. You literally turn it on and everything just works. But if you don't spend the time up front on assets, you can run into a lot of problems, because then you bring in the assets, then you bring in the vulnerabilities, and now all of a sudden you've got vulnerabilities against assets that don't match. Now you got to go through this like asset deduplication process. It becomes a much bigger problem if you don't spend the time up front on the asset side. Or if you have a perfectly clean environment, it's very easy. Obviously, you just turn both on, and that's your starting point. But if you've got a pre-existing CMDB that's pretty well filled out, you want to spend the time up front on the asset matching. with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump back over to the slide deck and just throw up our Q&A slide. And so if you guys don't mind, if you have questions, please throw them into that Q&A chat. Since we're about over halfway done, I'm going to go ahead and throw up another poll here real quick while we wait for some questions, just to get some information from you real quick before everyone starts jumping off. And with that, we'll open it up to questions. Let me go see if there's any more over here in the Q&A. So this question is there a document that we can refer to where it has the OT Tenable tables to the ServiceNow OT class table mapping? It's actually buried in a file within the application. I could show that real quick, actually. So let me go over here. There is, how do I get to scripts? I think that's what's that. There's a file called Tenable.ot where this is actually mapped out. This is not what I want. I can do it that way. I got a better idea because I know exactly where to do it. Yeah, I can open the studio that way there. There's a file where that mapping is called Tenable.ot. I will type that answer in here, Tenable.ot. That should be in the Assets app. Give me a second to log in. There's this huge mapping file in here. Right here. And at the very top of this file, there we go. There is an OT map. And this is the Tenable side. This is the class that ends up mapping to. And these are some other options that are used in the script for the data conversion. But this is Tenable side. This is ServiceNow side. So there's a whole file that covers that. And this script is actually what does all of the data conversion for asset import across the board. So you can take a look at that. So we answered that. Let's see here. Any other questions from anyone? Doesn't look like we've got any more there. If not, we can go ahead and end a little bit early. And please feel free to follow up with us. And I think, Tom, did you answer that question or get my email to that other person? Yes. Okay, somebody. We'll get that. Perfect. All right, and with that, please, there will be a post-event survey that we will get. If you don't mind, please go ahead and fill that out. And thank you, everyone, for attending today. Hope you have a great rest of your
One more quick thing, the recording of this event. Thanks, and wanted to say on behalf of ServiceNow, thank you so much to the whole Tenable team. Thank you, Nick, for coming on and presenting today. This recording will be made available fairly quickly after the event on the ServiceNow community. There will be the live event page. We'll have the recording embedded. It'll also be on our YouTube stream. So look for this there if you missed anything during the presentation. That's all I had. Thanks again.
Awesome.
Nick.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Have a great day.
Have a great rest of the week, all.